All right. Welcome, everyone. As you can tell, we're recording. Welcome to the Diversity Action Team's program, Housing Assistance Through COVID Relief, taking a closer look at Rock County communities' use of federal and state funds for affordable housing and housing services. It's a mouthful. We wanted to start out thanking our program partners, Hedberg Public Library, the YWCA Rock County, Beloit NAACP Branch 3251, UW-Madison Division of Extension Rock County, Janesville League of Women Voters, Legal Action of Wisconsin, Community Action Inc., and Justice Overcoming Borders. Thank you so much. We'd like to start out with a land acknowledgement statement provided by the Diversity Action Team, Allies of Native Nations Subcommittee. We would like to recognize that we are meeting on the ancestral lands of Native nations. In Wisconsin, there are 11 federally recognized Native American sovereign nations and one seeking to regain federal recognition. We acknowledge these Indigenous communities who have stewarded this land through the generations and pay respect to their elders, past and present. Just some housekeeping items at the beginning here. If you have any questions during the program, feel free to use the chat function in Zoom. Please stay muted so that we can have the best audio quality. There is automatic live transcription available. If you have a question that you don't want to submit so everyone can see it, you can send that question directly to me, Katie Udell. And then this session is being recorded and will be shared on the Hedberg Public Library's YouTube channel. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. So the program is split out into 3 segments. First, we're going to meet the community in the sense of we've got a video that we put together for this program. Afterwards, you are welcome to share it on, it will be publicly available on YouTube soon. Then we're going to get into COVID funding to assist in affordable housing and housing services with Michael and Laura. And then we're going to have the third section is representatives from Rock County, City of Janesville, and City of Beloit answering specific questions that we address to those 3 agencies. So now we'll start off with the video.
The affordable housing we do have
and tell you, the people that we work with every single day, they find themselves in a situation where they've lost their housing. And they would want the community to understand it's not because they're not trying, it's not because they're not working. Many of them are working 1 and 2 jobs, but they are not able to earn enough money to be able to afford the cost of living in our community. Rents have increased. In some communities or some neighborhoods in our community, rents have increased as much as 30%. We have families in this community that are living in local motels. These are folks. We have many landlords in our community and individuals to even consider them to pay double security deposit, first and last month's rent.
one experience that I can demonstrate a family that I worked with. Mom was employed, dad was disabled, in and out of homelessness, in and out of shelters. They were in and out of motels. They stayed with relatives in other communities during the summer, and eventually they owned a car. They were saving money for a mobile home because they couldn't find anyone would rent to him for that, and their rent record wasn't good. So they saved money to buy a mobile home while living in their car. The car broke down, so they had to buy a newer car. So how we helped that family is I worked with the family services and set them up with a caseworker. Housing program. They're still considered homeless because they're not paying the rent. The county is actually paying the rent for them, and I continue to help them with services through the school district. They're making ends meet with the Basford. Now,
So affordable housing is less than 30%. To secure housing. The city of Minnesota, a Section 8 voucher holder is required to pay 30% of their income, and the city of Janesville pays the difference directly to the landlord.
So through programs through the state, like the Wisconsin Emergency Assistance Program, we have a new program called Wisconsin Help Actions, so community action in Walworth counties, but it is we want people to be able and they need to be able to have the money from their business to be able to pay their mortgage and for other expenses. So we want to make sure that people are safely housed and that the landlords are being able to get their rental income.
It's really a matter of supply and demand. In our community, we just don't have enough housing stock to meet the demand in our community. There are so many individuals, families with small children who are rent burdened, which that means those families are paying more than 30% of their income for their housing. And then the added dynamic of those that are very low income who are severely cost burdened when it comes to rent. Those people are paying more than 50% of their disposable income. When we think about what that means for our community, especially given the COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing more individuals and families than we ever have before that are struggling in so many ways. These folks are having to decide, do I pay my rent? Do I forego childcare? Do I go without food? Do I pay my utilities? They're constantly in this mode of robbing Peter to pay Paul, just in order to keep their head above the ground.
So there's kind of a simple concept that we adhere to, and that is that every person deserves a safe place to live. Regardless of what they've done, who they are, everybody deserves a safe place to live. But how we get there can be a little more complicated. There aren't really any easy answers for how do we find affordable housing? How do we fix the problems that we're having right now in Rock County? Because it seems like this has been going on for a while, and then the pandemic just kind of complicated things. It made it worse for people who are looking for affordable housing. And so with today's market, you have people who are looking for an apartment, and they are being told that in order to get the apartment, they have to prove that their income is 3 times the amount of rent for the apartment. With the levels of rent right now, landlords are able to charge more for rent because there's higher demand. And so it is really hard for low-income families to prove that they have 3 times the income for the amount of rent.
We have one client that I wanted to share a little bit about that we've been working with. So I've been here for 17 years, and I've known this client for many years. And off and on, he's always been homeless, having issues finding apartments. African-American gentleman has a disability, many medical problems that have increased over the years, and currently is at an assisted living center right now because of his medical issues. But he has, luckily, we've been able to help him with case management and housing before he went into that assisted living facility, and we were able to actually get him a Section 8 voucher. But because of his limited income, many years of periodic homelessness in between housing, he can't find an apartment, even though he has the Section 8 voucher that will assist him. And I think he's had 2 evictions on his records that have been more than 7 years ago, but nobody is wanting to work with him. And even those that are willing to work with him, they're over the amount that his voucher is able to cover. So it's very hard right now, even if you have programs that are willing to help you with your rent, especially if you have past evictions, very low income. His income right now is about $600 a month. It's very hard to find any housing units.
COVID-19 created a situation where we already had a homeless epidemic, and now we had a pandemic on top of an epidemic. So for those individuals that were already struggling, trying to figure out the fastest way to become rehoused, oftentimes found themselves in homeless shelters and motels, or doubling and tripling up in some cases. And all of a sudden, now they're dealing with a situation where there might be some job insecurity. They're having to figure out how to quarantine, how to keep themselves safe. Issues with child care centers closing, having to convert to virtual schooling. And so just multiple issues that created additional stressors for folks that were already dealing with stress.
We see an increase in our students experiencing homelessness, which can lead to poor attendance, which can lead to missing assignments, which is hard for teachers to get kids caught back up in class when they're not in their seat most of the time. We find that a lot of our students are transient and they move around a lot. I've had some students in classes, this is their 3rd school in the school year. So every time a student moves from school to school, they fall behind academically at least 4 to 6 months. Families find stability in school when they're experiencing homelessness because we try to keep them in their school of origin. So a lot of shelters, community agencies now have money for motel vouchers. So I have a lot of students living in motels currently. The problem is Janesville, if the motels are full, then the students are in other motels. So right now I have students living in Lake Geneva, Elkhorn, Delavan, Whitewater, Beloit in hotels. For stability reasons, we keep those students in their and to figure out how to get the kids from Lake Geneva to Janesville every day. And we do that through gas cards for the parents or bus passes for students maybe living in Beloit. And then we have private drivers in our district that will actually drive students from other communities to school every day.
Due to lack of affordable housing, we're seeing an increase in the homeless population here in Rock County. This means community resources are being used more frequently to house temporarily at motels. For many years here at ECHO, we've provided about 4,000 nights in a local motel, but in 2021, we provided over 9,000 nights in local motels because of the lack of housing available here in our community.
When families cannot afford to pay rent, it creates a domino effect in the workforce, educational system, healthcare system, and our social services community. And without the construction of new affordable housing in our community, the crisis will continue to be more critical for coworkers, classmates, neighbors, families, and friends.
You know, in the Rock County area, we have an increase in homelessness like we've never seen before. You know, on any given night, 300 to 400 individuals are on various waiting lists for housing. For those of us that are working in the homeless response field, It can be very challenging sometimes to stay motivated, but I remind myself every single day when I think about the 400 to 500 kids in Rock County that are either in a homeless shelter, they're in a motel, or they're doubling and tripling up, that they need us to continue to do this work despite the difficulties that come along with it. And so for me, the motivating factor is making sure that I'm using every opportunity that I have to make sure that the voices and the needs of our most vulnerable citizens are heard.
Powerful video. Thank you so much to Jessica, Tammy, Kelly, Beth, Carrie, and Alan at JATV and Yvonne for all of your hard work in putting together that video. And now we're going to transition into the second part of this program where we're going to have Michael Basford with the State of Wisconsin Interagency Council on Homelessness speak.
Thank you, Katie. And thank you, everybody, for being on for this very, very important meeting. It's an honor to really be here. This group has been spending years on this very important issue, and I would just like to applaud the efforts that you've all done here in Rock County. Next. Position by Governor Evers in May of 2019. Prior to that, I was an associate director at an agency that provided permanent housing who had severe mental illness diagnoses. Next screen, please. I'll start with a little bit of a background in the history of the Interagency Council on Homelessness. It was created in November 2017 by then Governor Walker signing Act 74 after unanimous passage by the state legislature. Per statute, the council is made up by 8 agency leaders. Those are departments of administration, health services, veterans affairs, public instruction, workforce development, children and families, corrections, and WIDA, in an effort as well as community representatives from each of the federally organized continua of care in Wisconsin, and chaired by the governor. In this case, Governor Evers chairs the council. And the idea is to break down the silos between each of the agencies that have programming that intersects with homelessness, so that we could serve the most needy in Wisconsin better. The council meets once each quarter, and we have a work group meeting that meets twice each quarter, and our job is to develop homelessness policy for Wisconsin state government. In February 2018, the Interagency Council on Homelessness began meeting to create a state government plan for homelessness. Next slide, please. That plan was called so more about the homelessness spending. When the pandemic happened, we went from more of a policy front to an agency that provided technical support for all over the state for communities and private agencies that were dealing with the effects of the coronavirus pandemic and the ensuing economic downturn. We started by creating partnerships with federal agencies and non-governmental agencies to address concerns for those that were providing services for homelessness. In March of 2020, Governor Evers announced a 60-day moratorium on rental evictions and housing foreclosures. And then as that was happening, the state started the Wisconsin Rental Assistance Program, which distributed over $28 million to assist 14,000 households from June through November 2020. Next slide, please. Since then, there's been another group of funding called the Wisconsin Emergency Rental Assistance that has spent a lot of money and helped over 35,000 households in 68 counties. Laura will be telling you more about WERA a little while. Next slide, please. We also were distributing Emergency Solutions Grant and Community Development Block Grant funding from the federal government, and these were special allocations from the different relief bills. $32 million in ESG-CV and $12 million in CDBG were used to provide funding for projects and services such as new emergency sheltering, food pantry assistance, rental assistance, hotel vouchers, and other housing and homelessness supports. Next slide, please. We also stood up more programs toward the end of last year. The first being the Neighborhood Investment Fund, which is allocating $92 million for 19 projects that will be providing affordable housing units and emergency shelter beds. Toward the end of last year, we created the Safe Shelter and Homelessness Grant Program, and that's $6 million to help shelter providers increase capacity during the winter time so that they can provide shelter for more people experiencing unsheltered homelessness, to get them inside and to keep them safe. And Hush Services of Rock County received nearly $147,000 from that program. And the Wisconsin Help for Homeowners, which Laura will be speaking more about a little later on. Next, please. And we will be, over the next few months, rolling out nearly $42 million from HUD through the HOME program. And again, that's something else that Laura will be talking about later on today. So next slide, please. So now we'll talk about the plan that the Evers administration inherited from the Walker administration when they came into office. It was called A Hand in a Home. It was released right at the end of November 2018, including 33 action items organized around 6 different themes. And it included $3.75 million in funding, representing the first funding increases for state homelessness program in decades. And those funding requests, even though they were suggested by the previous administration, were adopted by Governor Evers in his 2019-2020 budget. Unfortunately, most of those funding asks were not allowed by the state legislature. Next slide, please. And so with the new Interagency Council on Homelessness, with the new administration, we started to work on reviewing the themes and the action items in the Hand in a Home plan that we inherited. And we did that leading up to spring of 2020. We were going to look at ways to amend the plan to make some changes, even though the previous plan has a lot to recommend, and we agreed with that. We felt that there were some changes needed, but at that time, that was when the pandemic started, and we had to concentrate on pandemic response. But we then continued to review agency programming during that time. In the summer of 2020, we stood up a racial equity working group to draft a theme for the new statewide plan that would be focusing on racial equity, and we'll be talking a little about that a little further down. And then starting in the spring of 2021 through the end of last year, we developed a new statewide plan. Next slide, please. And that plan is called Welcoming Wisconsin Home. It was adopted by the Interagency Council in December of last year and released at the end of February of this year. Included on it are 44 action items organized around 7 themes, and included over $12 million in funding requests and a request for a $58 million increase in tax credits for affordable housing development. These mirrored requests that were included but not adopted were included in Governor Evers' budget, but not adopted by the legislature. Mostly not adopted by the legislature. Next slide, please. So the Welcoming Wisconsin Home Plan is based on 6 guiding principles. And the first being that housing is a human right, which is something that we all may take for granted as a principle, having been around for now 80 years since it was adopted in the United Nations Human Rights Compact. But we felt that it was very necessary to remind everybody that this is how important this issue is. And then we also, the next one is ending homelessness as we know it in Wisconsin means creating conditions where any future instances of homelessness are rare, brief, and non-recurring. The third is being that housing is the lodestone for better outcomes throughout society. You know, if you want your test scores to go up in schools, invest in housing. If you want your crime rates to go down, invest in housing. If you want better physical and mental health outcomes, invest in housing. We can, and there are so many more things that are directly tied to the availability of housing and its effect on society. Next slide, please. The fourth guiding principle is that for people experiencing homelessness in Wisconsin, the single greatest barrier to securing stable housing is the lack of affordable housing unit availability. And that is something that you've been hearing now in the previous video. We'll be talking more about that tonight. Fifth is that the goal of ending homelessness as we know it in Wisconsin is inextricable from the moral imperative to address the efforts of a long history of racial disparities in the homelessness system and housing markets. Where we are right now is not something that happened overnight. It is something that has been happening for generations in this state. Public sector and private sector policies of things from redlining to racially exclusive compacts for neighborhoods to other economic discrimination and opportunity discrimination have created in Wisconsin two different paths of housing availability based on your race. And it should be not surprising that based on all of this, we now are in a situation where in the state of Wisconsin, where the population is 83% white, that white people make up less than 50% of people who are receiving services from homelessness programs. Next slide, please. And then the sixth guiding principle is that the council supports the principles of housing first for all programs that serve people experiencing homelessness in Wisconsin. And we go on to explain in the plan what that exactly means. Housing first is used by a lot of people as a buzzword, but there's a lot behind it, not just in putting people into housing as quickly as possible, but also making sure that they have the tools to survive and succeed in a sustainable housing environment. Next slide, please. So I'll go through the different themes that we have and touch on some of the action items that are included in the plan. The first is focusing on equity. And as we said, you know, we were very intentional about what we wanted to say about the role racial disparities played in the homelessness crisis and what we need to do to get out of it. And so in order to show that, we wanted to make sure that we put this theme right up front. And those action items include racial equity working group that started back in 2020. We're keeping that active. Using racial equity analysis framework to review all the state programs that intersect with homelessness, collecting demographic data from agencies and promoting home ownership. The second theme is investing for success, which includes many budgetary items that increase funding for existing programs and creating new programming. Next slide, please. The third theme is improving housing access. And this is for creating new programs for housing navigation that will get people from homelessness into housing much more quickly. And also then to create new funding to bring more affordable housing units online. The fourth theme is increasing housing stability, and this increases funds for the homelessness prevention program, skills enhancement program, homelessness case management. Those are very important programs that the state runs already that help in housing stability. We will be pursuing federal sources for health and housing supports from the Department of Health Services and the federal government. We are looking at a lot of landlord-tenant legislation for ideas to change, to bring back balance between landlords and tenants. We're looking at potentially creating a program for civil legal services, and then for also increasing employment and income. Next slide, please. The fifth theme, of course, is using data and information. It is really hard to look at one number and say, if this number goes up, it's going worse. If it's going down, it's getting better, as a benchmark as to how we're doing in serving the most vulnerable who are homeless or housing insecure. There has to be, there are a lot of different ways that we can look at it, and we have to bring all of those in. Where we don't have data, we find ways to get it, and we have been doing that over the last 3 years, and we will continue to do that through this theme and its action items. We will be expanding the use and the sharing of HMIS data, that stands for Homeless Management Information Systems, database that statewide all private agencies that receive federal and state funding participate in order to be able to track services provided to people, and also to track the outcomes to make sure that we're serving people the right way and getting them into housing. And then we'll also be developing a state homelessness dashboard so that people can look and have access to all of this data that we're bringing in and get a clearer picture of what the needs are throughout the state. The sixth theme is leveraging our resources, which comes from increasing funding for the housing assistance program and promoting homeless preferences for housing choice vouchers. And then the next slide, please. And then the theme 7 is expanding community partnerships. We can't do this alone. Ending homelessness as we know it in Wisconsin is an all hands on deck need. And I think all of you can understand that. All levels of government, federal, state, county, municipalities, the private sector has to be involved in this. Our houses of worship have to be involved in this, and all aspects of our community have to be at the table in order to solve this problem. And so we are looking into expanding those partnerships by studying social impact bonding, a public-private partnership that has worked in a lot of places around this country in increasing housing and affordable housing, expanding education efforts on homelessness so that Wisconsin citizens are better informed about the situation, creating landlord property manager work groups so that we can bring in a very important part of the solution, which are landlords, and we understand that. We want to include persons with lived experience to give us input on the programs that happen in the state. And then finally, to create a regional homelessness consortium with neighboring states, because our homelessness issues do not begin and end at the state's borders. And we want to be able to have a really good relationship with our neighbors so that we can solve problems or solve issues as they happen in our border communities, as you in Rock County are aware of, but also to share ideas to help each other out. Next slide, please. This plan also includes performance metric section that details action steps, assigns responsibilities, targeting timelines, and measurable indicators of success so that we know, if we're going in the right direction or not. And the metrics will be reviewed for progress at every ICH quarterly and work group meeting so that we remain on track with this plan. Next slide, please. And so this is my contact information. You can find a copy of the Welcoming Wisconsin Home Plan at the top of the page at homelessness.wi.gov. Thank you very much for having me here this evening. And now I will turn it over to Laura Laux of Community Action.
Hello, I am Laura Laux, Deputy Director at Community Action, and I'm just going to go through some of the programs that we have received specific to COVID funding to assist affordable housing and housing services here in Rock County. Next slide. So most of you have probably heard about the Wisconsin Emergency Rental Assistance Program, also called WERA. So for someone to be considered eligible for WERA, they do have to have a current 2022 application for energy assistance. There can be some confusion with applicants around this process. The state uses the energy assistance application to determine income eligibility for the Wisconsin Emergency Rental Assistance Program. So because they're applying for the energy assistance, that tells us that they are in fact income eligible then for the rental assistance. And that same system that processes utility payments processes those rent payments directly to landlords. So the WERA program can pay arrears and up to 3 months of rent going forward. The maximum benefit for this program is 18 months of assistance. And we do have many people that are reaching that 18-month threshold every week. If say they're going to receive their arrears and 3 months rent going forward, if they need an additional 3 months, they would need to provide their income information to Community Action to recertify at that time. Next slide. So we've been doing WERA assistance since March of 2021. Prior to March, we did have other funds that were referred to as RAP. So those numbers are not included. But since March of 2021, we've provided utility and rental assistance to 34,329 households. And that equates to almost $133 million. That figure does exclude the counties of Brown, Dane, Milwaukee, and Waukesha counties. Those counties get a direct benefit themselves, so they are not included in those figures. So nearly $18 million of these funds have directly assisted households in Rock County. Just over 4,600 households and that equates to 11,000 individuals. And this has prevented evictions of those households. And as well as Beth mentioned in the video, making those payments to property owners so that they can continue to run their small business. Next slide. So in addition to the rental assistance, the state of Wisconsin has recently, within the last month to 2 months, implemented the Wisconsin Help for Homeowners program. So WIRA is for rental assistance. This is for homeowners. It's a statewide program that can help with overdue bills such as mortgage payment, property taxes, and utilities. With this program, they do have to be delinquent. So for folks who are not past due in their mortgage payments or utilities or property taxes, they will not be eligible for assistance. That could change in the future, but at this point in time, the state is saying that they're going to first focus on those who are past due. And that also has income eligibility requirements, and they had to have faced an economic hardship since January 21st of 2020. So there's help for both sides, renters and now homeowners. We're still kind of in the early stages and kind of working out the kinks in that project with the state of Wisconsin. You know, every day it seems something new comes up. Next slide. I think I already had that slide. But if the state does have a website where people can go to apply directly. We do use a program called Neighborly. So it's a portal where the applicant can apply on one side, and then Community Action is providing assistance on the other side, as well as their lender or servicer is also engaging in that system so that it's all coordinated through a website. If that is a challenge or a barrier for some folks, then we will work with them to address that barrier so that they're able to use that software. Next slide. Great. And next would be Jennifer Petrozello from the City of Janesville.
Thank you, Laura. Earlier in the presentation, Michael mentioned that there was going to be funding available for homeless housing projects throughout the state of Wisconsin. The Rock County Home Consortium, which consists of the cities of Beloit and Janesville and Rock County, will be receiving an allocation directly under this program called the Home American Rescue Program, or Home ARP program, from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Oh, sorry, next slide. The overall purpose of the program is to provide homelessness assistance and assistance to other vulnerable populations. So this funding is very specific to those individuals who are experiencing homelessness. A lot of times when we talk about affordable housing, we may be talking about income-based housing for those who are extremely low or very low income. This is based on the housing characteristics and risk factors that individuals are experiencing. So individuals who are currently homeless, those who are at risk of homelessness, domestic violence survivors or victims of dating violence, sexual violence, stalking, or human trafficking, or others where the services would prevent homelessness or really serve those who are at greatest risk of becoming homeless, is the target population for projects under this funding. In total, just over $2.4 million will be available countywide, and all funds must be expended by September 30th of 2030. Next slide, please. Under the Home ARP program, there's 4 main categories of eligible activities that these funds could be utilized for. The first one is affordable rental housing, which could be something similar to the River Flats development that's shown here on your slide. It could also be smaller scale rental housing projects as well. The main factor with the affordable rental housing is, of course, that it does need to be utilized by those qualifying populations we just talked about. So it's a different approach for our developers who are typically working in the affordable housing market. And it will mean that they're going to need to be working with area service providers to ensure that they're connecting individuals that meet those categories with the housing services that and units that are made available. A second category of eligible activities is tenant-based rental assistance. This is very similar to the Section 8 rent assistance program that's operated with the cities of Beloit and Janesville, where in this case, up to 100% of rent and utility cost could be provided for those individuals. Assistance is attached to the qualifying person, not a specific property in those situations. A third type of eligible activities is for non-congregate shelters. So the other picture on the screen here is showing a conversion of a former motel property into a non-congregate shelter. Excuse me. Non-congregate shelters do consist of one or more buildings that provide private units or rooms that do not require occupants to sign a lease. So in addition to rehabilitating motels, this could also include conversions of nursing homes or other similar type properties. In all of those cases, funds could be used to acquire properties, could be used to acquire land, could be used to offset the actual construction cost, or could be used to rehabilitate properties. And finally, the last category of eligible activities is a wide range of supportive services for individuals who are not already receiving services from another program. And I've listed here just a couple examples of what those supportive services could be, including childcare, education services, housing counseling, legal services, mental health services, and many others could be included under that category. Next slide, please. So we have not yet determined how home ARP funds will be used here within Rock County. Our planning process is currently underway. We are just about ready to wrap up the public consultation process. Members of the consortium have reached out to homeless service providers and advocacy groups, particularly through the Homeless Intervention Task Force and the Beloit Area Task Force on Homelessness. We've also reached out to domestic violence service providers, veterans groups, public housing authorities, and public and private organizations that address the needs of the qualifying populations, persons with disabilities, and those that provide fair housing and civil rights education. What we're finding as we go through this public participation process has not been surprising to us, but really confirms what we're seeing as a municipality. The Homeless Intervention Task Force identified affordable housing development as their top priority, followed by mental health services, emergency shelter, and multiple month rent. We did a survey of homeless and housing service providers, and when they were asked to identify all unmet needs, those areas that received the highest responses were, again, affordable housing development, emergency or temporary shelter, and supportive housing services specifically related to mental health. Asking them to pin it down a little further to the single greatest unmet need, over 75% indicated affordable rental housing as the greatest unmet need. followed by 13% indicating supportive services for mental health, and 5% each in the areas of direct rental assistance in emergency or temporary shelter. Earlier this week, we also had a meeting with affordable housing developers who shared the rising construction cost and the competitive nature of the low-income housing tax credits, our potential obstacles to utilizing these funds in our communities. But they recognized and were very open to partnering relationships with service providers to make sure that those connections are being made with qualifying populations. And those conversations will continue as we move through our planning process. Next slide, please. So our next steps in the balance of this month and into May, the consortium will be completing our needs assessment. We'll be identifying specific countywide priorities amongst those 4 eligible categories that we talked about a minute ago. And we'll be developing an application process for agencies and developers to submit proposals that would best align with those countywide priorities. We're anticipating having an open application period in June and July, and then evaluating those proposals and formalizing a allocation plan in August. We'll then be doing a second round of public engagement and comment to make sure that those allocations are really what the community wants to see. And that process will wrap up in the September through November process with public hearings and formal approvals. Yeah, I will be sticking around under Q&A if you want to learn more about home ARP funding, or if you have thoughts to share and things that we should be considering as we wrap up our needs assessment. Next slide.
Thank you, Jennifer. So now we're transitioning into the 3rd segment of our program. This is where we asked these 3 agencies the same questions, and they're going to be responding to them. So we're going to first have Andrew Baker with Rock County speak, then Doug Markline with the City of Janesville, and Terry Downing with the City of Beloit. The questions that we posed to each of the communities was, first, what's the community population and the median family income? And with that, the average cost of housing and rent in the community. And then the second part is the funding decisions. How much money was received for COVID relief? How is the municipality defining affordable housing? Are any state or federal COVID relief funds being allocated for affordable housing and housing services? Any new or existing programs being utilized? What is the timeline? When is it being built, or how many people would be helped with that funding? And then the third piece is a brief update on the community projects that have been completed since the Impediments to Fair Housing study was completed in 2019. A couple of years ago, right at the tail end of their planning, their study, these 3 agencies did present at a diversity action team program to share their findings. So now they're kind of reporting back. So with that, I'll introduce Andrew Baker.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Katie. And yes, thank you. And in this capacity, I am the Director of Planning and Development and also Land Conservation Department for the county, which includes staff support for the Rock County Housing Authority. And on the line also for later, we have Supervisor Kathy Schultz, the Chair of the Housing Authority, and the Director of Human Resources, Kate Luster. Next, please. So here's a brief overview of the county as a whole. In 2020, the population was just over 163,600 people countywide. When you exclude Janesville and Beloit, the other villages and cities, unincorporated areas, were just over 61,000 for population. And for the county as a whole, in the 5-year average between 16 and 20, median household income was $59,500 roughly. And again, county as a whole, there's just over 69,000 housing units, approximately 68% of those being owner occupied. And the median value of an owner occupied house in the county is just over $146,000. Again, based on Census Bureau statistics, the median gross rent in the county is $860. And the median owner occupied cost with a mortgage is nearly $1,300. And based on these statistics, 3.9% of the population of the county is considered in poverty. Next, please. So overall, via the American Rescue Plan Act, the county received approximately just under $32 million, $32.7 million. Millions more in COVID relief has been distributed via state and federal sources, via nonprofits, as we've talked about earlier this evening. And as Jennifer spoke about, we also have additional funding via the home ARPA funds for our consortium of Janesville, Beloit, and Rock County. Next, please. So to put this in context, if you're sitting there as our county board supervisors have over the last couple of years, even though the COVID relief funds offer a wide variety of eligible expenses, the county board as a whole must consider other factors in making these funding decisions. In other words, Wisconsin law still applies. And I won't read this in the entirety, but essentially the county board still has to follow legislative authority in terms of how county funds can be spent. The county operates differently as an arm of the state versus municipalities such as the city of Janesville and Beloit in terms of how county funds can be spent. So in other words, each proposal for use of the ARPA funds has to be analyzed in terms of, does it still meet statutory authority for a county to spend funds in this manner? So that just puts it a little bit in context. Next, please. The first project that the county board approved was something that resulted from our analysis from impediments to fair housing, as Katie mentioned in the introduction, was to provide support in terms of tenant legal aid. This was approved for just under $150,000 annually for 2022, 2023, 2024, via contract with Legal Action of Wisconsin to provide legal aid to low-income citizens facing evictions or other housing-related insecurities. And as of right now, Legal Action is working on staffing a full-time attorney and part-time assistants that will have office space at ECHO in Janesville. Next, please. The next big win for the county board was the approval of a new position in the Human Services Department. It will be a homelessness prevention coordinator. The funding was approved as of April 1st and will run through 2024. The resolution approving this new position emphasized the fact that employment readiness resources and improved access to mental health and substance abuse treatment was a priority. The county board decided that this type of investment in long-term reduction in homelessness and access to affordable housing is viewed as a more sustainable resource rather than short-term funding solutions, which would end potentially when the ARPA funds were exhausted. In other words, it's investing long-term in the community. And this homelessness prevention coordinator would be a hub for collaboration with local stakeholders, which is something that the county has not had in the past in the Human Resources Department. Next, please. The next decision that was made just last month was a reserve of ARPA funds for a family-centered transitional housing services in partnership with Family Services of Southern Wisconsin. This is funding reserved up to $3 million to build a new facility that would offer transitional living for up to 20 families, which includes childcare, employment support, and links to other community services. The idea here in this decision was that this commitment by the county would serve as support and would generate additional resources via grants and other funding sources from the community. Next, please. On the same evening, the county board reserved up to $3 million for another initiative to help alleviate the challenges of homelessness. This program in concept and via resolution is a tool intended for the new homelessness prevention coordinator to strengthen initiatives in the county. It's a grant program that, as the county board decided, it would be a dollar for dollar match for any non-governmental entities or municipalities less than $8,000 that proposed a homelessness related program. And it would also provide a dollar match for every $4 generated by municipalities over a population of 8,000. So as you can see, the only municipalities in the county over 8,000 are Janesville and Beloit. So this program provides a little bit of a benefit more towards the communities that have lesser resources, the smaller cities and villages and or towns and nonprofits that have plans developed to address these concerns. Next, please. So another update regarding the analysis to imperative to fair housing. These are a couple projects that the County Housing Authority has granted preliminary approval, not using ARPA funds, but using our allocation from the Home Investment Partnership. 2 projects in Edgerton. One would provide up to $3,000 to help with the rehab of Edgerton senior apartments, which was developed, I believe, in the early 1980s. So it's time for new roof, new windows, water heaters, furnaces. So this would be housing for elderly and disabled citizens. There's 24 units. It's a $2.5 million project. Also included is in terms of initial funding is $250,000 for the development of 6 new supportive housing units in partnership with Edgerton Community Outreach in downtown Edgerton to provide new resources for the community, in where the offices would be located in the 1st floor and the apartments would be on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Next, please. Another project that the Housing Authority has been working on in partnership with our consortium members and other entities in the community is to develop an eviction reduction strategy. As I mentioned earlier, the county has already provided funding for a new staff attorney for legal action to assist with tenant-related legal issues in the county. And the staff members of the Housing Authority have also been part of the eviction work group, which the focus has been working to modify the eviction procedures in the county. The group has already developed draft work rules or revisions to the draft work rules and sent those to Chief Judge Dillon with the help of legal action. And in the big picture, this was as noted, this was one of the goals of the analysis to impediments of fair housing back in 2019. Now, obviously, the pandemic has slowed evictions just based on the current procedures in the court. However, the group has worked through this to develop ways to avoid evictions that are simply tied to scheduling and other procedures that can be viewed as unfair to tenants. In other words, the timeline and schedule and notification for tenants there isn't, the work rules can be viewed as slightly disadvantaged, or I should say an advantage to the landlord in some cases. Next, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Council Member Doug Markline from the City of Janesville.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, hearing from the county's point of view. I'm Doug Markline, former City Council President for the City of Janesville, and I'll go to our first slide, please. And you can see here that Janesville is just about the same as Rock County with our numbers here. Now, these numbers are from 2020 or earlier, and I believe the housing numbers will have gone up considerably since then. When a study was done, the average one-bedroom apartment was over $1,100 a month, which means you would need to make $21.40 full-time to be able to afford that comfortably. Next slide, please. And this is the burden on it. Up 30% of gross income is considered cost burden, and 21% of our renters are that's over 1,800 families. If it's over 50%, you're severely cost burden, and that number is 18% of our renters, which is almost 1,600. So the total households experiencing a cost burden in the City of Janesville is almost 40% of our renters and 20% of our owner households, which is a number that's way too high. But it's unique. It's not unique to Janesville. It's unique to the country. So next slide, please. These are the funding sources from COVID relief. As you can see, excuse me, there's 3 of the community development block grant, coronavirus, AIDS, the first one, the second one, and the third one. We also have the housing choice voucher program, part of the CARES Act, and then the American Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA, was the biggest one there. That was a little over $11 million that came to Janesville. Next slide, please. And this is where the money is allocated right now. For the first COVID, we did 90,000 of emergency rental assistance, and we've got money to be allocated, and we're accepting applications right now for that. For our CV2, we did 35,000 for medical and health thing through HealthNet. We did almost 33,000 for motel vouchers through ECHO, 33,000 House of Mercy shelter, and then teen programming for the Boys and Girls Club of 20,000. And you can see the numbers, how many people that supported. For number 3, we 204 hotel vouchers for ECHO and the House of Mercy. House of Mercy also an additional 15,000 shelter services, more money, 10,000 for boys and girls, and then 20,000 to help out our senior center, which has 800 seniors that benefited from that on a day-to-day basis. On our CARES Act, the Housing Authority is using it to offset the increase in housing assistance costs for families, and almost 500 households are on that program. And then ARPA funds is in some ways to be still determined, but a lot of it has gone forward. We did an emergency operations plan to make the city work better. We replaced the lost revenue. We are working to improve our lead and service replacements, our remote work provisions for our city employees in case this happens again, money for the Woodman Community Center program, and then the Pay It Forward program, which we just did about a week or so ago. On that one, the majority of the money went to ECHO to build 6 transitional housing units and the programs that go with that. We also did $750,000 went to the Boys and Girls Club toward their new facilities. And we also did 60,000 of that went to repairing and updating some of our inner city housing for people that have issues for that. Next slide, please. We also have our multifamily affordable research, our home program, with money set aside for affordable multifamily housing. Our community development block grant has also set money aside for our housing. And then the tax incremental finance is a tool that the city takes advantage of, the ability to extend the TIP program for 1 additional year with the money going directly toward affordable housing. And the River Flats project that's photoed in here was a major beneficiary of that funding. And we'll have more TIFs closing up here shortly that will allow us to do more. So next slide, please. And so that what we just said, the River Flats 92 unit affordable housing, we're working with additional developers. We've completed an evaluation and rollout of a housing choice voucher home ownership program, as Jennifer said. Also, she said we're working on the homeowner rehabilitation program, and we continue to offer down payment and closing cost assistance program and education. Janesville's dedicated to creating a strong fair housing enforcement and outreach program through our ordinances and our outreach efforts. We support the county's ARPA funding for legal tenant resources. We're working to facilitate eviction reduction work group and increase access to consumer education through partnerships with our other organizations that are active in the city and the county. We recognize the importance of having affordable housing, like many communities, we are experiencing a shortage. We are promoting it as a strategic objective of the city of Janesville, so it's right in our mission, active in implementing program changes to increase fair housing opportunities. And once again, some of the efforts that the city of Janesville and the city council are working on is what we said earlier, the TIF funding, extending it 1 year with the money going to promote affordable housing. We also try to buy up foreclosures when they come on tax sales, rehab those for qualified low-income families. That one provides quality housing, 2, it improves the neighborhood, and 3, it keeps these out of the hands of slumlords. So we're able to have home ownership and less exorbitant rents. We also have encouraged and allowed the building of transient housing for some of our workers, especially in the agricultural industry. This provides safe and quality lodging for the employees, and it also frees up post-health space for those that are in need of it. And once again, the ARPA funds that we just recently did, almost 1.7 million went directly to providing affordable housing and transitional housing and boys and girls clubs. We recently opened up our Section 8 program for new enrollments. We were not surprised, but there was 600 new applicants showing the need in the city of Janesville for that part. And we work with Community Action. It's been a very important resource this last 2 years, the program to allow tenants to remain in their rental unit or their home without crushing debt, and the ability to fund the landlord so that they're able to provide this housing without going into financial hardship themselves. And I would say the biggest challenge that the city of Janesville faces, and we're not unique, is the location of affordable housing. We're experiencing a lot of not in my backyard discussions whenever something comes up. And that'll be a challenge for this council and future councils and administration as we go forward. Thank you for the opportunity to do this. Appreciate it. Thank you. And next, the city of Beloit.
Hi, everyone. I am Terry Downing, and I'm the Deputy Community Development Director for the city of Beloit. Next slide, please. The city of Beloit has a population of about 37,000 people. Our median household income is about 47,000, and persons in poverty are almost 20% in the city of Beloit. Next slide, please. So cost burden for us is that about 53% of renter households have a housing cost burden, and about 31% of homeowners have a housing cost burden. And as explained in previous slides, that means that they're paying more than 30% of their gross monthly income towards housing expenses. Our rental households, the median rental housing cost is about $764 a month, and the average rent for a 3-bedroom apartment in Beloit is about $1,052. Homeowner households, the median ownership cost is less than that at about $1,030, And we did a local study which revealed that it was about $146 or $1,046 per month. So the first figure is a national from the American Community Survey, and then the 1,046 is a local report. Next slide, please. So according to that local report in the MLS data, the average sales price of a single family home in Beloit increased from $126,000 during 2020 to about $145,000 during 2021. This represents almost a 15% increase in the sales price for single family homes in Beloit. The average sales price of a single family home in the city has increased 59% since 2017. Next slide, please. The data that we have, the funding that we received for COVID relief is listed in this slide. So our community development block grant funding that we get on an annual basis. In addition to that, we received Cb1, Cb2, and Cb3 funding through the CARES Act. And Cb1 was about $384,000, Cb2 was about $163,000, Cb3 is about $165,000. And I want to clarify that this funding, the CDBG funding that we receive, both our annual allocation and these extra allocations, we give that funding to other agencies to provide services, public services and other services to our community. Our housing authority has both public housing units and housing choice voucher or Section 8 units. We did receive some CARES funding for that, not very much, but the $64,000 and $140,000 to assist with those programs. Our American Rescue plan for the city, the funding that we received there is about $15 million. Next slide, please. So this is the breakdown of the funding that we provided to the different agencies in our community to provide services to the residents in our community. So the Cb1 funding, you can see we provided about $384,000 to local agencies, Cb2, $163,000, and Cb3, $165,000. I do want to mention that the Cb2 is actually a state allocation. We did receive Cb1 and Cb3 directly from the federal government. The Cb2 came from the state. The amount of households that we were able to assist is listed in the right-hand column. There are some funds that we do need to reprogram that we weren't able to expend. So we will be going through a substantial amendment process to reprogram that funding. And I also want to point out that we're still continuing to assist households with these funds. We're still expending the dollars. So the assisted numbers that you see in the column on the right is as of April 5th of 2022. So a number of the agencies are still expending the funds and still assisting families with those funding sources. Next slide, please. Additional COVID relief funding we received is the Public Housing CARES funds. This just shows the accomplishments from the funding that we received in the previous slide. So the funds that we received for public housing was mostly used for additional administrative costs, and any remaining funds were added to the reserve. So there was some additional administrative work that needed to be done due to households experiencing difficulties with the COVID-19 pandemic. So there were some additional hours that we needed to pay for. Same with the Section 8 or the HCV program. We use those funds to offset some operating costs, which was mostly administrative. Right now we have 131 public housing units and 152 vouchers that are out in the city. The City of Beloit's funding through ARPA is still to be determined. the city will be going through a public process and some public input to decide how that funding is going to be used moving forward. Next slide, please. So the city of Beloit has some existing programs that we want the community to know about. So Beloit Housing Authority has 131 public housing units. We can provide assistance to up to 598 Section 8 vouchers or housing choice vouchers. That depends on how high the rent is. So if you saw on the previous slide, we only are assisting 452 households at this time. That's because the rent has been so high recently. We're trying to find ways that we can get more vouchers out into the community with our Section 8 voucher program. We also have the Family Self-Sufficiency Program for Section 8 voucher holders and the Ross program for our public housing units. The city's housing rehab loan program, we have a rental rehab program that offers low interest loans to landlords that want to rehab their rental housing. We also have a vacant rehab single family loan program that offers forgivable loans if somebody wants to renovate a vacant and abandoned property and either sell or rent it out to eligible participants. And then we have our tax increment financing or our TIF extension that we will be using for our affordable housing. We are still in the process of determining how that funding is going to be used, but we're leaning towards the most need in the community right now is for affordable housing. So trying to find a way to increase the number of affordable housing units in Beloit. For affordable home ownership, we have our home investment partnership program. We have a couple programs under there where we do purchase, rehab, resale, and then new construction. Axe Housing, we have a great partnership with Axe Housing, which is a nonprofit organization that is matching homeowners with our vacant properties that have been foreclosed on for taxes. And they're matching homeowners with those houses and then offering a rehab loan and support in order to rehab those houses for people to live in. We also have our home buyer education and rehab construction under Axe Housing. The city's housing rehab loan program for home ownership, we have a construction loan, and then we have a rehab loan that helps our homeowners, keep up their houses at low interest rates or deferred or forgivable. NeighborWorks Black Hawk region, we also provide funds for them to offer down payment assistance for folks who want to purchase homes in the city of Beloit. Next slide, please. The city of Beloit has, as mentioned in previous slides, we were part of the countywide study for impediments to fair housing, analysis of impediments to fair housing. So the progress that Beloit has made so far, goal 1 is to create and preserve affordable housing. We have the affordable housing TIF program that we are moving forward on. We support the Axe Housing program with buying the tax foreclosures and keeping them in our housing inventory for them to be matched with homeowners. We are very engaged with the Beloit Area Task Force on Homelessness. We're engaging developers and local officials in YIMBYism, which is yes in my backyard. Beloit has experienced a lot of not in my backyard when it comes to affordable housing, developers coming in to provide tax credit housing or affordable housing. So we're trying to engage our local organizations and our community into expressing what the need is in Beloit and expressing positive things about affordable housing development. And we're also continuing our neighborhood revitalization strategy area activities in census tracts of 16 and 18, which are the Hackett and Merrill neighborhoods. We're injecting additional community development block grant funding in those areas, as well as making partnerships with local organizations to provide additional supportive services to those two census tracts because they are our lowest income, they have our lowest income households, and they are also minority concentrated. So providing additional services to those areas to make sure that the residents have the resources that they need in order to succeed. Goal 2 is creating a strong fair housing enforcement and outreach program. The Equal Opportunities Commission just approved an RFP for a qualified fair housing organization to do outreach and education in our community. Goal 3 is to improve tenant and housing provider communications. This is to be determined because we need to work with our qualified fair housing organization to make sure, or to decide how they're going to move forward with those things. Goal 4 is to improve public transit. The city manager did move our transit organization or our transit agency from the Department of Public Works into community development. That helps with aligning the needs of our low to moderate income populations and census tracts with the needs for public transportation. Community development studies those things and plans for those things, so it just made sense for transit to come into our department. Our routes were completely modified in 2020, and they were further improved in 2021 to make sure that our transit was meeting the needs of the people who need it the most. An additional study we will be initiating in 2022 for microtransit, so we're excited about that. And then goal 5 is to develop an eviction reduction strategy with which the Rock County explained how the 3 communities, City of Janesville, Rock County, and Beloit, are working together for that. We did also allocate some CDBG funding to Legal Action of Wisconsin for this strategy. And then we're also participating in the eviction reduction work group, which was talked about with Rock County. Goal 6 is to address predatory land contracts. This is also to be determined with our QFHO. And then goal 7 is to connect underserved populations with life improving opportunities. So we'll continue to support programs with CDBG funding and then continue additional public service funding through our neighborhood revitalization strategy area. I do want to mention that April is Fair Housing Month. So that's a very important thing. That's when the Fair Housing Act was passed by Congress back in, and I'm embarrassed to say I can't remember the year, but it's very important to recognize that. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So we like to end our Diversity Action Team programs with a call to action. After hearing all of this information, asking ourselves, what can we do as individuals or together? So the first would be to share your voice, support affordable housing initiatives, and share information with others. I will share in the chat the links to the different government agencies. Challenge NIMBYism, as mentioned previously, support living wages. Then here are a bunch of links, which again, I will place in the chat and they'll be shared on social media later. But self-educate, we've mentioned at previous programs, the book Evicted by Matthew Desmond is very powerful and based in Milwaukee. Donate financially or with your time to organizations working to assist individuals and families struggling to find affordable housing. So here's a partial listing. Carrie Kulinski with the school district of Janesville had mentioned, that she has funds that she allocates for homeless assistance. The school district of Beloit does as well, and you can write checks made out directly. The other sites, you're able to donate online. Youth focus, Project 1649 is really focused on our youth homeless population, and practice service learning, share your voice, encourage others to do the same. Here's some links. Again, I will share that in the chat. So a huge thank you to the planning committee, Michael Basford, Dorothy Harrell, Yvonne Mitchell, and myself. Thank you so much for attending. A recording of this will be posted on the Hedberg Public Library YouTube channel. Check the Diversity Action Team website and the partner Facebook pages for upcoming events and registration. We are looking for people that are interested in being part of the planning committee, coming up with ideas for future programs. So if you are interested, please email Jean Carfora at this email address here. Upcoming programs. So the next Diversity Action Team program is May 19th, the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Rock County. It will be by Zoom, 6 to 7:30. You can access registration information like you got to this site on the website. Courageous Conversations is this coming Monday at 5:30. Again, you have to register in advance for this Zoom program. It will be on disappearing women, how treaties and laws leave us vulnerable. And it is exactly 7:30, so we can stop the recording now, and we will enter